everyone. Welcome to the Conversations with series for the EEA. Today, we're talking to Dr. Constantin Burgi, a brilliant macroeconomist at University College Dublin. He's also recently part of the Education Committee here at the EEA. Thank you for joining us today, Constantin. It's great to have you. Firstly,
Thank you so
tell
much
us
for
a bit
having me.
about yourself. What sparked your passion for economics? How did your research interest develop? And what drew you towards teaching macroeconomics and a little bit of econometrics of finance as well?
So I've generally been always interested in how politics, economics, and financial markets all kind of interact with each other. Particularly, I lived through the 2008 crisis when I just finished high school slash started college. So that was kind of a big experience there. And so from there, I then worked in the field as well a bit in the private sector and it more and more developed that actually a lot of these things are driven by expectations. So there's not an immediate impact from something politicians do or the central bank does on the economy. It depends very much on expectations. And so how these expectations are working throughout the economy is something that really interests me. And so that's my main research focus. But I also then, given this interplay, there's also more stuff going on in international finance and monetary policy more broadly. And so that kind of all comes more or less together.
Yeah, maybe just an extra question for fun. If you could have a conversation with any economist, past or present, who would you speak to, and what would you ask them?
I kind of have two names here. I don't know. It would be might be interesting to talk to both. Uh, I will probably pick Marshall and Keynes. So these are two famous economists from the first half of the 20th century. Both have uh, been famous both on the political side. They have been very influential. Almost everybody knows about the Marshall Plan, and almost everybody knows how Keynes contributed to both Bretton Woods and earlier to the resolution of the Great Depression. But they're also famous for producing the textbook at their respective times. I mean, Keynes was kind of a student of Marshall, but they have quite opposite views as well. One is more a classical economist, and the other one is, well, Keynesian economics, meaning in one case, the central bank has no impact on the economy. The other one, central bank has very much impact on the economy. And so it'd be very interesting to see their opinions and see what do they think about what happened in the past, let's say 20, 50 years, and what is their viewpoint on that, both from the perspective of what happened in the economy overall, but as well in terms of teaching economics and how all these things changed relative to the time where they were active.
Yeah, I mean, let's get down to some education questions. What are some of the biggest challenges you see in economics education today? And, what's something that you're doing to tackle them?
So I think the biggest challenge that I've seen in the classroom specifically is how many different levels, different backgrounds the students have. And this is to some extent by design, and we love to have a diverse classroom, but some students are in a principles of economics class. Some students are econ majors. They want to do economics. They know where they are. Others have that class as an elective, and they might have any background, be it both. They might not have a lot of math background. They might be specialists in math, but also in terms of economic concepts, some know something, some don't know a lot. Then you have other people from other majors which are related to economics to some extent, be it business finance or other majors as well. And so trying to get the interest and engagement from all these different type of students and conveying and keeping it interesting and challenging for everybody is really, I think, the biggest challenge that we're currently facing. Now, what am I working on in terms of addressing that? So I think the best way of doing so is targeting different groups or trying to provide hooks for every type of group. So providing maybe additional, more challenging math problems for people with good math background, linking stuff to current affairs, because if something's in the news, maybe, or in TikTok or whatever the current medium people are looking at is running there, people might be interested in that. Also, maybe having students engage with the material in different ways, providing videos having specific additional material, or making sure they actually do the readings. And I might get later on as well a bit more on how to do that. But I think these are kind of ways how one can try to get everybody on board.
Obviously, with the rise of LLMs and AI now, how do you see these generative AI tools being integrated into economics education in particular? And what challenges do you see as well in that?
So I think in general, these AI tools give us a lot of new opportunities. There are some risks to them, but we had that over and over again. We had the introduction of computers, we had the introduction of Wikipedia, and now AI. And so all these th new things that we have always led to the question, oh, what do we do in exams? Should students still memorize stuff because they can look it up, etc.? But at the end of the day, it's still the case. If you're sitting in a meeting and your boss asks you a question, you better have an answer ready. So yes, you need to memorize some stuff. And similarly with the AI tools, yes, you could have the AI write you an essay, but given the way LLM models and so on work, it will be a terrible essay because they're not designed to do that. At the same time, they're really useful if the English level is not perfect. And who speaks perfect, pristine English? Well, everybody can always improve a little bit on one's writing. I think having access to one of these AIs to improve one's writing is really an amazing thing. And also, if we use this generative AI, I want to talk about a specific topic, and now I can't find a picture online on that specific topic. Well, why don't I let AI generate a picture of exactly what I want to talk about? I think this is a great possible use of this AI and can make the class more interactive in that sense if you have very targeted pictures, but also can help students perform better. Um, yeah, we need to keep it in mind that they could use it for purposes that writing papers through AI, but to some extent, fortunately, or to some extent, also they're not designed to do that. It's relatively easy to detect if AI wrote the whole thing or not. And again, improving the English is, I think, perfectly valid, and it's actually a great thing to do.
Do you see any concerns in sort of the assessment side? So maybe how assessments might need to evolve. Maybe there's better ways to evaluate student understanding of concepts. What do you think sort of needs to be done in that regard?
So I think there's a big tension between what will be best for the students and the resources available to us to actually do this testing. If I look from my perspective, how much time I have to spend on things, it will be multiple choice all the way because that's basically zero effort for me to grade. Yes, I need to come up with the questions, but they're test banks, so that's basically very, very low maintenance or low effort on my side. And I can focus on other things then. If I look from a student perspective, that's the worst possible way of testing in an exam. And so what the challenge is to somehow bridge the gap also, what is feasible in the classroom. Now, I want to be fair to the students, so obviously I want to give them an exam where they can show what they know and where they can show, and I get also feedback, what did I actually teach them? If it's just multiple choice, well, they just can make random crosses and or random ticks, and I can't get any feedback from that for myself. But if I have them write an exam, I can actually see, oh, this question they actually really struggled with, then maybe I need to change the way I actually teach this. Um, and also at the same time, one thing is some of the classes are just very large. And if I have a 100-class applied economics class, I can't have an essay, which will probably be the best approach, because if you have to write an essay, you have to go through the stage of collecting data, running some estimation, interpreting the estimation, and coming up with a topic and literature and that stuff as well. And so that will probably be the best way of assessing an applied economics class. However, with 100 plus students, there's no way I can have individual essays. So we need to somehow have a middle ground, maybe group essays, which also have their shortcomings and problems. But if it's properly managed, it might be feasible and still substantially less time consuming than individual essays. So that could be a solution there.
Yeah, I mean, let's get down to more of your teaching style and method. So, what sort of teaching techniques have you found have been particularly innovative or really useful and quite effective at, conveying like your complex macroeconomic models or intuition into your teaching?
So I think let's come with two kind of techniques, one more for a lecture setting and one more for a tutorial setting that I've used and I've experienced and I found very useful. And that works both for technical settings and for less technical settings. So in a lecture, what I do is I have required readings, which is a chapter which might be 10, 15 pages or so. So it's not really extensive, but I have, before the lecture starts, I have a mandatory quiz which counts towards the final grade, which means the student need to engage with the material to some extent, and then they have some simple questions which they need to answer, and they will have a tiny percentage of their final grade. This way, they will have engaged with the material already before the class, which means that they kind of, okay, they've seen this one thing they don't understand, but this other stuff, yeah, that's easy, they don't understand. So in the lecture, they can then ask questions specifically on the topics where they struggle. They can engage. They might not be as afraid of asking questions, particularly since they can also interact before that with other students. They can discuss already beforehand. Well, they had to read it anyway, so they can discuss with each other already a little bit if there's problems. And I think that allows them and allows me also to be more effective with the students. Now, the second approach, more for tutorials, is basically a flipped classroom. Um, the difficulty I found there is if it's completely flipped and I pick on a random student to go on the board and answer the question, is some students are shy, they're afraid their answer is wrong, doing something wrong, etc. So the way I kind of fix this is by saying, okay, at the first class, let's make groups of like say 5 students, and then we have a number of groups with 5 students each, and say, okay, I'll ask randomly from each group to answer full questions or partial questions. And this allows them then in the week or so, they have time to actually prepare the questions in the tutorial to solve the questions, discuss with the other students, hopefully come to a good answer. And even if it's wrong, that's fine too. But they can then go on the board, they solve it on the board, can learn from each other. And I think that was very effective too.
Just as a quick follow-up, have you found any technologies maybe as well that have been particularly useful in lectures or tutorials?
So in terms of technology, well, the main addition I found really helpful in general is my YouTube channel. So one thing I did there is similar to if you have a small economic problem, like how for undergraduate, how do you graph if you have two equations, how do you one for demand, one for supply, how do you actually plot that in a graph? And or for graduate level class, it would be like you have a simple DSG model. How do you solve that simple DSG model? And going through every single step very slowly in a big YouTube video, and then the students can look at that and see, okay, based on the book, I got stuck somewhere. And on the video, they can pause the video, rewind it, go back and forth, and get exactly the answer to their question. And because it's really done step by step without any jumps and really say, okay, I'm going now with this assumption from this equation to this equation. It's really helpful. I found it really helpful for students, and that's also been reflected by a lot of people apparently watching these videos and enjoying them.
So you teach a lot of like primary macroeconomics. How do you make the model sort of more accessible to students who might lack a little bit of mathematical formalism? How do you make the intuition more accessible? What have you found particularly effective in that regard?
Well, I might actually repeat myself here. So the YouTube videos obviously are really good help there. But I think also one thing that we economists should be good at is to explain something in terms of words, meaning intuition, and say how things are related, in terms of graphs, and in terms of equations. And so if somebody struggles with one of them, there's still the other two ways how students can do very well. And so making sure that when going through a specific model or specific topic, to use all three methods that allows also students to, for one, hear it 3 times, but also see it from different angles and in different ways, and that can be very helpful as well to follow up on these more difficult and challenging topics.
Looking more towards your research side, you did a paper on comparing sort of Okun's law in different countries and cyclical differences. Do you think the insights from this paper could be incorporated into sort of an undergraduate lecture setting, especially because Okun's law is so key in undergraduate economics as well? Um, yeah.
I I definitely think so. I mean, I think there's two interesting contributions of the papers. So the first one is that we can look at it at a sectoral level. And already doing that is actually quite challenging or quite interesting because what does it mean if you're unemployed in the financial sector? Um, so I can't ask a person, okay, you're unemployed. Which sector do you belong to? That's already a challenging question. So how does it solve this? You take the last job, and that's the sector you assign people to. But thinking about exactly how to measure that, that can already be something interesting for students to think about. How do we actually measure things in economics? How do you measure unemployment? How do you measure inflation and the other topics? No, inflation not part of Okun's law, but still measuring economic variables for that, it can be very interesting. The second thing is that we find is looking at the cross-country differences, we can see that most of these differences are at a country level. So it's not that, oh, this country is really strong in mining, this other country is really strong in manufacturing. So obviously they behave differently because of the different sectors are just one's bigger, one's smaller. No, it is overall labor laws that appears to be driving the differences in Okun's law coefficients across countries. So countries are very unionized, some countries are not very unionized, some countries have very easy ways of hiring and firing. Others basically have you can only fire or hire somebody with several months lags. And so this is has a very strong impact on this Okun's law coefficient. And I think that's also something that can be directly put into the classroom by saying, look here, there's differences across countries. That's where it comes from.
I mean, following on, similar to this, what underrepresented methodologies or perspectives do you think are lacking in sort of an undergraduate economics curricula that you would want to see integrated into?
So I would actually, to some extent, it's the math or equations. So particularly in macroeconomics at the undergraduate level. Now, at the graduate level, we have way too much math. But at the undergraduate level, I think that what I found is if we go over some models like the ISLM basic macro model, yes, we have equations, but we're not talking about how the different variables work into each other and how things are related. And I think there we could do a lot more with showing, okay, it's not just intuition, it's not just the graphs, okay, now this curve shifts, etc. But because this equation looks that way, we can now say, okay, this curve actually shifts right and left, and this other curve shifts up and down, because that's how the equations are. And if we just say, okay, right and up is the same, or depending which curve it is, that can lead to confusion if later down the road you have actually a model where direction really matters. And so if you have the equation and understand how they work, I think that can be very helpful.
Um, what's one aspect of economics that particularly inspires you? Maybe an event or a theory or a recent study that maybe you'd like to share?
I think it's to some extent the versatility that I really like about economics and it's inspiring. Particularly, you might read a story in a newspaper or you have a small talk with somebody else, and then you have kind of based on that, oh yeah, I never thought about this. And we can then use economics to actually properly check, okay, what's going on? What would an economic model for this look like? How would this work? And bam, we have a potential research paper for this. And I think economics is one of the few fields where you can actually do that also with just random small talk you have. I would assume in a more engineering or technical field, yeah, if you have a random conversation on the street, it's much harder to do something like that. Obviously, you can do the same thing, small talk among engineers and where it can get very technical. But in economics, you don't even need like It should usually be still somewhat related to your field, so you can come up with an idea on a topic completely unrelated to your field, but it's still much easier to come up with some nice ideas just by chatting with people.
Um, let's dial down more to sort of the focus on the EEA. So what do you think the value to economics education is that, that the EEA brings, the education committee? What value do you think is being sort of brought there?
So the EEA Education Committee has three main goals. So the first goal is to understand uh, what and how is economics being taught across the continent. The second one is to provide training and resources for economists to improve teaching. And the third is to incentivize innovation and excellence in teaching economics, be it through grants or through prizes. But more generally, I think if we connect all these things together, the Education Committee is, to my understanding, the only organization or the only kind of committee that does this on the overall continent and hence brings together people from different countries within Europe, from all the institutions across Europe, and is able to then basically pool that knowledge and the exchange between educators and teachers. And so I think that that is a really, really valuable part of the committee.
Are you seeing any particular future trends in economics education, or is there any piece of advice you'd like to give future educators or economists?
So let's start with the second part. So what advice would I give to future educators? I think it's really important to not reinvent the wheel. Um, Even if it's a new topics class that one is teaching, you can go to existing materials and based on existing materials come up with a topic and have basically the structure of the course. Yes, don't basically take the material as is, but and adapt it, of course, but don't try to come up with something completely new. At the same time, though, always try to change some things and try out some new things. Because if I've learned anything from teaching, it's basically, yeah, no teacher is perfect. And there's always way someone can improve. And by never trying out new things, you will never be able to improve. Yes, some things will go wrong. That's normal. But some things, when you don't try out new things, you will not improve. So always try out some new things. Now to the other question, which was specific trends that I'm seeing in the future of economics education. I think that one thing that's very interesting, to some extent challenging, is that the current global environment shows that a lot of economic theories are being tested. So a lot of countries are trying new things, or they're trying things which, based on lots of economic theory we have, might not end up the way that it's communicated initially, or people might think that it will end up. And so, and some other fields become more important. For example, 10, 20 years ago, sustainability was something that wasn't that important, but now it's basically has to be in almost every curriculum. And so I think that in terms of trends, what we need to do is we need to adapt to this environment and always need to make some changes to the curriculum and to the course content to make sure it stays adapted to what the current situation is. So for an explicit example, 5 years, 10 years ago, if I teach macroeconomics and monetary policy, something really important was the effective lower bound or zero lower bound, where all the central banks, Western central banks, hit zero interest rates or went slightly negative. And so how can they stimulate the economy more? This appears to, right now, with the last bout in inflation, to basically not be relevant, at least for the next couple of years. So it might be worth saying, okay, well, it might become relevant again in a couple of years, but for now, it's not really that relevant. So it might be worthwhile to replace it with something else, which is actually currently of more importance.
Thank you so much for doing this, Constantine. I mean, it was really great to have you. Do you have a final message, anything you'd like to say? Um,
Well, thank you very much for having me for this interview. I think you had some very good and very interesting questions. Um, and I look forward to seeing the final product.
Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you.